Category 4 hurricane, which continues to intensify just before landfall. We're expecting landfall later tonight. As of right now, wind speeds are sustained at 150 miles an hour. That is very close to a Category 5 hurricane. So forget the numbers, forget the cats. It is going to be devastating. It's going to be very damaging and possibly deadly. We're talking about the possibility of hurricane force winds that extend several hundred miles outside of the eye wall, and also a tornado threat that's ongoing right now. That's the red polygons that continue. So I'm going to toss things over to meteorologist Hunter Williams. He's been crunching the numbers, pulling out a lot of stats, and because when we talk about Laura is possibly breaking a lot of records out there.
Yeah, Erica, it's really interesting to put this storm into historical perspective. So winds with our latest advisory are at 150 miles per hour. And since records began, there have only been 9 hurricanes that have made landfall with winds of 150 miles per hour or higher. Keep in mind, there could still be another couple of hours before landfall, so we could see additional strengthening. If it were to strengthen up to, say, 155 miles per hour, then that would place Laura on the 5th place all-time for strongest landfalling hurricanes. Number 1, that was from back in 1935, the Labor Day hurricane way back then with winds of 185 miles per hour. In more recent history, a lot of folks refer to Hurricane Camille, which made landfall in 1969 with winds of 175 miles per hour. But it's not just the winds that make this system noteworthy. Let's take a look at exactly where this system is. Again, with that 7 p.m. advisory, winds are at 150 miles per hour. It's moving north-northwest at 15. Our landfall is expected later on tonight, right around midnight or 1 a.m., very close to the Louisiana-Texas state line. That point of landfall is interesting because take a look at what history shows us where we've seen Category 4 and Category 5 landfalls. Where we're expecting the system to move in, there has never on record been a Category 4 or Category 5 landfall in that exact spot. The yellow dots that you see, those are the Category 4 storms. The red dots, only 4 of those dots, those are where the Category 5 storms have made landfall. The most recent you see on the Florida Panhandle, that is where Hurricane Michael made landfall. Let's zoom in a little bit closer again with that projected landfall tonight right on the state line. You can see we've had some Category 4 hurricanes that have made landfall closer to the Galveston area. And of course, a lot of us remember Hurricane Harvey here in central Texas. And then further to the east over southeastern Louisiana, we've had Category 4 and Category 5 hurricanes. A lot of folks refer to Hurricane Katrina, which did make it up to Category 5 strength, but actually weakened prior to landfall. So Hurricane Katrina is not on this list. That was a Category 3 storm at landfall. But lots of interesting historical perspective on this storm. We'll keep a close eye on things. We'll have, again, that latest advisory coming up in just a bit. For now, Brian, over to you.
All right, Hunter, I don't know if your mic's still on, but I had a question for you while you're there. You mentioned that Hurricane Katrina did downgrade from a 5 to a 3. That's a pretty big jump. Any indication that this storm would do something similar at this point?
Yeah, unfortunately, Brian, it looks like this could be a situation where this one could be kind of strengthening right up until landfall. That's something that we saw with Hurricane Michael. Not a lot of wind shear, and the ocean temperatures are fairly warm. So we'll cross our fingers and hopefully it could weaken. But as the indications look right now, this one could continue to strengthen, and with winds of 150 miles per hour, it's a high-end Cat 4, and at this point, it's not that the category makes a ton of difference. It's catastrophic damage either way. But if it got up to 157 or higher, Brian, then that would classify it as a Category 5 storm. But unfortunately, as things look right now, this one could be strengthening right up to landfall.
It's grown fast just over the last 24 hours. Hunter, thank you for that. Very good perspective there. As we take another live look at Galveston Island, you can see the waves still rolling in there. Again, as we've talked about with Hurricane Laura heading toward the Texas-Louisiana border, right there between the two states, this would be to the west of the storm, which would be a good thing in Galveston. Now, Beaumont, on the other hand, a lot closer to the border, Quita, and that's an area that is expecting a lot higher wind speeds and a lot more storm surge as this storm moves in.
That's right. That's why they've been asking people to please evacuate from those areas. Get out while you can. And, you know, for a lot of them, it's too late. The cities there have said that as soon as the wind started picking up and getting to around 35 miles an hour, they weren't going to be doing any rescues or anything like that. And our own Luis De Leon is actually in North Beaumont. Luis, take it, and what are you seeing out there? What's happening now?
Well, Quita, right now we're in northern Beaumont. We're in an empty parking lot. This shopping cart area right here is just as empty as this big parking lot right behind me. And we haven't really come to you live from northern Beaumont just yet, but we're really starting to get a sense of just how empty it is up here. Take a look over here. You can see a large truck of some sort. It's carrying something. We walked up to a little bit. It does appear to be a big gas tank of some sort on there. Over to the left, that's Highway 287 over here. You can see how empty it is. Once again, just a couple passing cars. This is the highway that we take really to get down to Port Arthur and to downtown Beaumont as well. Follow me this way up the empty parking lot here. What's right behind me is a large market basket. You can see that it is boarded up, completely boarded up. Across the front of the store there's a sign on the side doors that do say that they are closed for now, and they aren't really sure when they're going to open back up, just once things calm down and when it is safe to open back up. But yeah, like you guys mentioned, we have been out and about in Beaumont throughout today, primarily in Port Arthur. That's where some people are actually going to be sticking out the storm and sticking back here and everything like that. They do tell me that they're just tired of running, and they are tired of having to deal with these storms, of course, and understandably so as well. The temperature actually did just change recently. We do want to say that. I know that it is a little bit later in the hours now, but it has gotten a little bit cooler. The winds have started to pick up a little bit more and hold a little bit more consistently. And I will say, when we were in downtown Beaumont, the winds were picking up and then dropping back down. It is a little bit more consistent now as that storm does move closer to our area. We're going to go live from a couple different spots around town here, but for now, back to you guys.
All right, Luis, while we've got you, real quick, you said in Port Arthur, which is a little bit closer down to the coastline south of Beaumont. You've also been around that area visiting with people who have been through storms like this, and you met up with some people who weren't leaving. You said they were staying there. What is the attitude like of people that you visited with that have decided to just stay this out?
Sure. So when we were actually at that seawall in Port Arthur, that's actually where we bumped into some of those residents who decided to stay. We bumped into two residents in particular. It was a father and a son. They were telling me how they've really been through every hurricane that's hit this coastal area since 1995. Keep in mind, there are a lot of big names there and some big storms as well. So they've actually lost their home several times. They just bought a home up a little bit more inland from that seawall in Port Arthur. And their attitude, they're very optimistic. They really are. They do say that they've been through this enough times that they do feel prepared. Other people, I could tell, they were starting to get a little bit more nervous. And I do think that is because of the reports that come out as this storm has been intensifying. But nonetheless, a lot of them really staying optimistic and really just hunkering down during the storm. That is the shared attitude usually for a lot of those people that tend to stay. They want to take care of their belongings. They want to take care of their property. That's what we've been noticing down here.
All right, Luis, thank you very much. Luis De Leon down in northern Beaumont tonight, watching as Hurricane Laura continues to move in. Now, we want to reset things a little bit for you tonight, tell you what we're talking about. Hurricane Laura, now a Category 4 storm, and it seems to be getting stronger. It's set to make landfall around midnight to 1 a.m. It is said to be an unsurvivable storm surge coming along with it, bringing damage to areas around the Texas and Louisiana coast. And that surge may penetrate 40 miles inland. Evacuees are being brought throughout central Texas, across the state, many here to Austin, a lot of them staying in hotels. We've got about 3,000 evacuees here so far. And Austin is also now prepping the convention center to serve as a shelter.
All right.
Okay, I want to bring you back and take a look at the data that's coming out, because something was interesting that Luis De Leon pointed out. He said he's felt wind gusts kind of pick up and then calm down. So that's going to be the pattern that we start to see as the system moves closer inland. So what I did, I drew in, if you can see this arrow that's pointing northward, and it says 60 miles just on top of it. That is how far hurricane force winds extend. So we're feeling wind speeds of up to 75 miles an hour, 74 miles an hour sustained. And that's why you can start to see a darker purple shaded color for the extreme southern tip of Louisiana, and then some deeper orange shaded colors. That's where wind gusts are being reported right now in the 39 mile or 30 mile an hour range. We need 39 mile an hour wind speeds and wind gusts in order for that to technically be tropical storm force. So this system is getting closer. As far as where it is at the moment, we are less than 80 miles away from the eye reaching the southwest tip of Louisiana, which is where we are expecting landfall around this time. I do think it's going to be more of a southwest Louisiana landfall, but the call is very close. Right now, computer models are still showing the possibility, this forecast cone on the extreme eastern part of Texas, but we'll be tracking that because it still hasn't officially made a north turn. It's now north-northwest, and until it makes that northerly turn, will we be able to tell a lot better where this system is exactly going to make landfall. Okay, so we are going to turn things over to a Skype, or I'm actually going to turn things over to Brian Mays, because looks like we have someone that we're going to chat with.
That's right. MSNBC's Ali Velshi is with us now down in southeast Texas. A pleasure to have you. First of all, thanks for taking the time. What are you seeing as this storm makes its way toward the Gulf Coast?
Well, let me show you where I am. I'm just south of downtown Beaumont. I know you just had a report from there. We're starting to see the winds pick up a little bit. You're starting to see the sky look exactly like you expect it to look right before a hurricane. We got these light gusts. They're not really there yet, but you can sort of hear them a little bit. You're starting to see the bands circulate. No real rain here. We haven't had any for a few hours. You see I-10 over here. You're not seeing a whole lot of activity anymore. Very little. What we did see a little while ago is the bucket trucks coming in. Beaumont and Port Arthur fully expect two things. They're going to lose power because they always lose power, and they're going to flood because they flood with very little. We flooded with Imelda here with 3 feet. We certainly flooded with Rita, and we are expecting much more than that. So the Gulf is about 30 plus miles to the south here. As you know, Port Arthur a little closer. So we're going to see. We just don't think we've got enough watershed area for that water to be absorbed. So Port Arthur and Beaumont bracing for, particularly if that storm doesn't take that northeasterly turn, but even if it does, this is still going to get hard hit. A lot of people sticking around, as you just heard described. They have been told if you stick around, you're on your own. Emergency vehicles will not be around. We're probably 3 to 4 hours from having seen the real impact of it, but it's starting. You're starting to feel like the hours before a hurricane here in Beaumont, Brian.
Ali, you've seen these storms before. You've covered hurricanes before, and we can hear the wind through your microphone. This is going to be an overnight event. What challenges does that pose, not just for people that are living in the area that chose not to leave, but for first responders there in southeast Texas?
Listen, first responders have said we're not going out. We're not going out with the winds that are high. The problem with overnight, or even right now, we're under a tornado watch as we speak. We've seen some of these tornadoes, certainly in western Louisiana, but this is perfect for a tornado. And at night, you can't see the damage that a tornado is causing. We're looking at a high Category 4, possibly a Category 5 hurricane. That's strong, but these tornadoes are yet stronger generally. So overnight tornadoes are really, overnight hurricanes are damaging because you can't see the damage that's being done. And almost every parish and county here has said when the wind tops 45 miles an hour, we're not going out. So if you're in there, you're on your own. You know the National Guard and other groups have stationed high water vehicles and rescue vehicles, but they're not going out in the dark. So a lot of this is going to hit into the wee hours of the morning, maybe until 5 or 6 in the morning. And at that point, when the sun comes up, we're still not going to be able to have rescues out. They will start tomorrow morning and hope that some of this water recedes.
Before we let you go, Allie, I have a couple of more questions. Real quick, we see sometimes people get storm fatigue. Our reporter Luis De Leon had mentioned that. They've been through this before, they say. Have you spoken with people there in Southeast Texas that are giving you the same indication? We know what to expect. We've been through this. We're not leaving.
And as you know, that's a uniquely Texan thing as well, right? Texans want to stick around. They want to watch their property. They want to. They're tough. Everybody's got their windows fitted out for the plywood. There are basic preparations. Nobody's an absolute denier around here about the effect of storms, but generally there's a view that water will come in, water will go out. It should be fine. What we learned with Harvey, however, is that in Beaumont and big places like this, sometimes it's not fine. Sometimes the pumping stations are overwhelmed. Water supply is overwhelmed, and it could be weeks, not days, without power. Now, again, there are a lot of people prepared for that. They've got generators, they got little boats, they got everything they need, they've got food to get through it, and that's okay if you know how to get through it. The danger is that there are a lot of people who don't have the means for that, the money for that. They're still worried about COVID, and those are the folks we're worried about. Did they stay home? Did they not evacuate because they're short of money, or they're short of a place to go, or they're worried, or they're vulnerable? That's where the issue is going to be tomorrow morning, how to rescue those people. But by and large, most people around here have seen a number of hurricanes. They've got some sense as to what to do about it.
All right, last question for you before we let you go. What is your plan as we head into the overnight hours here, Allie? How are you going to stay safe there with your crew?
So we're going into downtown Beaumont. We found a place that's ground level but more than 20 feet above sea level. So it is likely not to get inundated. And next to it is a concrete parking structure that is 4 stories high. So we have the ability to keep going higher and higher and higher. In fact, we just went to do a site survey of it about an hour ago, and it would be a perfect place, having done probably 10 hurricanes or so, to ride out a hurricane, because you're somewhat sheltered. The wind will still be there. You won't get the rain, and you won't flood. But we got food, and I got peanut butter bars, and we've got water, and we know which way the wind is coming from. That's the one thing about hurricanes. You always know where the wind is coming from, so you can prepare yourself for it. Again, tornadoes are the danger because they pop up, and you don't know where the wind is coming from. So in an overnight hurricane, what I'm worried about is tornadoes.
All right. Allie, thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate you. Please be safe, and let us know how it's going tonight. We'll maybe check back in with you after a while. Appreciate your time tonight.
Good.
Ali Velshi with MSNBC, kind enough to take a few moments. He's in Beaumont covering the storm for the network, taking a few moments for us here as we are bringing you live coverage here on the air on KVUE as we prepare at least to help our neighbors all we can. We know you have friends and family in Southeast Texas, many of you. So as you can see on the bottom half of your screen there, the storm Hurricane Laura is moving toward this way. This is the bridge headed into Lake Charles, I believe. Some first responders or some emergency personnel there keeping people safe. It doesn't appear like there's much traffic headed into Louisiana at this point, or even out of Louisiana for that matter. But that's an area that's going to be right in the middle of this as the overnight hours approach. You can see many people have listened to the authorities and gotten out of town, many of them heading here to Central Texas. And I think we're going to have Erika come in now and describe kind of what we're talking about. He had mentioned the threat, Erika, of that severe weather, which is something a lot of people don't really consider when you think about a hurricane with 150-mile-an-hour winds. That's the concern. But really, there are other concerns like those tornadoes and that severe weather that comes along with a storm like this.
Yeah, I feel like people forget the severe weather threat, the tornado threat, because, I mean, now we're talking about so many different scenarios. It's really hard to keep up. Okay, I'm supposed to worry about hurricane force winds. I'm supposed to worry about power outages. I'm supposed to worry about, do I have the supplies? There are so many factors to keeping yourself safe, your loved ones safe. But this is why it's very important to listen to the forecast when we're chatting about the possibility of any activity in the Gulf of Mexico. I'll tell you, as a meteorologist here in Texas, if you see any activity 2 weeks out on computer models of any generation, you're on top of that, because we know how easily the system can explode. We know how easily it can get out of hand. And this is the perfect scenario because computer models, they were not forecasting the possibility of a Cat 4, Cat 5 until a couple of days ago, right? We barely saw that possibility. And there's so many ingredients, so many factors, that this is why it's very important, not only for us to do our job as meteorologists, but for you to do your job, to stay on top of the forecast 2 times a day, not only for you, even if you do not live in the Houston area or you live in the Louisiana region that's going to be impacted. But you guys tuning in Central Texas, this is a very important learning point to make sure you're keeping your loved ones safe. Any family that's out in these areas that will be impacted, because there's so many people that do not listen to city officials, do not listen to the warnings and heed the advisories and alerts that we put into effect. But this is why it's very, very dangerous and important. Okay, I'm going to toss things back to Quita. What's the latest, Quita?
Well, you know what? You were talking about people needing to be careful out there. Taking another look right now out in Lake Charles, Louisiana, which is right in the path of Hurricane Laura. This place is going to get hit so hard. And Ali Velshi, he was saying that people out there, a lot of them choose to stay behind. They say they're relying on generators. They know how to keep themselves safe in this kind of storm. What people don't really think about, though, is the aftermath. If a storm like Hurricane Laura comes in, it can wipe parts of that place clean. You'll be without electricity. You'll be without food, clean water. You'll just be pretty much up a creek. And it can last for weeks. There were some people in the last hurricane that didn't have power, I should say, for a couple of months. So it's not just staying safe now, it's not being there in the aftermath as well. And when giving his update on the storm earlier today, Governor Greg Abbott spoke about the areas state leaders are most concerned about and what people may be dealing with if they didn't evacuate beforehand.
One river that we do anticipate having the greatest challenges is the Sabine River. The Sabine River in the past, and we expect this time also, could spill over into areas around Orange as well as Deweyville. And people in those areas need to be aware of the high probability of facing high water. We do expect power outages in the areas hardest hit. I want to make a very important point about something that we have experienced in the past that's caused the loss of life that people may be unaware of. If you lose power, it's very important that you do not bring your generators inside a home. That can lead to carbon monoxide poisoning. You need to leave those generators outside of your home.
All right, and that was Governor Greg Abbott talking about some of the problems people could face when Hurricane Laura moves through. And again, another look outside right now, look in Lake Charles, Louisiana, the area that is expected to take a massive hit from Hurricane Laura. And I know that our meteorologist Hunter Williams has an update right now, a big update that we need to get on. Hunter, tossing it to you.
Quito, I want to pass along some observations from one of the Hurricane Hunter flights. They are currently in the system right now. They are flying around and they have recorded a wind speed observation of 158 miles per hour. We can take max 3 as well and show this on the graphics for everybody at home. Now, it's not confirmed yet. We'll actually get another one of these hourly advisories in about 10 minutes. So we'll see if that observation from the flight crew there is going to translate. Sometimes they can adjust those or flag some data, but you can see that maximum wind speed estimate, and that's a surface estimate of 158 miles per hour. Of course, with the Saffir-Simpson scale, winds of 157 miles per hour or higher would categorize a storm as a Category 5 storm. You'll also notice they've recorded a pressure down to 936. With that previous advisory, the pressure was at 940. So again, the lower the pressure, the stronger the hurricane. And a lot of times what we see happen is that pressure will drop and maybe the winds lag a bit. But as that pressure continues to drop, ultimately the wind speeds continue to ramp up. So we're just a few minutes away likely from getting another one of those updates. But let's put this again in some additional historical perspective, even given the wind speeds that we have now. Assuming it makes a landfall in Louisiana and does not nudge just west across the Texas line, but assuming it's a Louisiana landfall, Laura would be the first major hurricane to make landfall in Louisiana since 2005. That was Rita. Of course, also in 2005, a lot of folks remember Katrina. Only 9 hurricanes have made landfall in the U.S. with winds of 150 miles per hour or higher. So if it's upgraded to even 155, then the list gets even smaller. In Louisiana, per se, there's only been one other hurricane with winds of at least 150 miles per hour, and that was back in the 1800s in 1856. That was just a few years after the observations or historical records began. So here are the stats right now. As I mentioned, we are likely just a couple of minutes away from getting another advisory in from the National Hurricane Center. As of now, the official numbers are 150-mile-per-hour sustained winds with a pressure at 940. We've seen some recon, though, from the hurricane hunters that are flying through the storm as we speak, and they've had the pressure down to 936, which would be 4 millibars lower, and they have a wind observation up to 158. As I mentioned, those are not final numbers, but that oftentimes can be a precursor to what we're going to see in the next advisory as they are currently flying around in that storm. We're likely still a few hours away from landfall. That's going to be closer to 1 a.m. or so tonight, right on that state line. So here they are again flying around in there with the wind speed estimate at 158, 936 for the lowest pressure. We'll see if that is in fact translated in the new advisory, which will be out in a few minutes. Here's the latest forecast code, which again brings it in as a high-end Cat 4, if not, maybe on the cusp of being Cat 5, depending on what this next advisory says. That's going to be closer to about 1 a.m. tonight, and then that will continue to swing up to the north. One of the big things with this system, we're talking a lot about the wind speeds, but it's not just wind. Storm surge, and Erika was touching on this earlier, 15 to 20 feet of storm surge possible with the center of that system, and then just off to the right, that's where you see that greatest push of wind and in turn the greatest push of water. So that's going to be a major concern from the Louisiana state line and points just off to the east, even as far east, as southeastern Louisiana. Storm surge on the order of 4 to 7 feet will be possible as this moves inland. Speaking of, before we toss things back over, we'll go through the latest track on Hurricane Laura with the model turned on, and you'll see that again for us here in central Texas, far removed on the dry side of this system. We're really talking minimal impacts, just small rain chances in our forecast. But this will move inland into northern Louisiana, and still this is going to be a powerful storm. These systems obviously weaken once they move inland, but still, if you have a high-end Cat 4, even a Cat 5 making landfall, the winds don't immediately diminish. So still, this could be even very far inland, a pretty significant wind threat. We saw that with one of our last very strong storms to make landfall, Hurricane Michael, which even into southern and central Georgia had pretty significant wind damage. So that's going to swing up to the north, ultimately into Arkansas, and then swing off to the northeast. We'll get you back to the latest numbers on the advisory. And Brian, I think you have a question on what we're seeing.
You mentioned the pressure. What is the pressure? What is that dealing with? What does the lower number indicate, Hunter?
So the lower the pressure, the stronger the storm. And basically what a hurricane is it's a very strong low pressure system that develops over the ocean. So you can have low pressure systems that are over the land, we talk about those all the time, but the lower the pressure, that corresponds to a stronger system. So if we were to see that drop from, say, 940, which is the pressure now, down to 936, that would be very strong. And as that continues to drop lower than 940 or so, we're starting to get into the threshold where historically, that's where we've seen the pressure of previous high-end Cat 4s and even some of the Cat 5s, Brian. So lower the pressure, stronger the system, and that also tends to correspond to the gustier winds, which is what we've seen.
And how is that measured? Is that measured by the hurricane hunters themselves?
Yep, so the hurricane hunters will fly in there, and they actually have drop signs that they can drop down out of their planes, and those will fall to the ocean surface, and they record not just the pressure, but also wind speed. So the hurricane hunters, they fly in there, and they take observations at flight level. They also drop equipment down through the storms, and especially for instances like that, that is valuable information.
All right, Hunter, thank you so much. And wow, just listening to those numbers, seeing those numbers, I should say, 150 miles an hour. You were saying 158, as much as 158 miles an hour. We should be getting the new numbers and everything in just a few minutes. And this is what a lot of meteorologists are calling a catastrophically strong storm. This hurricane is no joke. And of course, we're going to take another live look outside Lake Charles, Louisiana, the area that is right in the path of Hurricane Laura. And you can see they have police trying to block some of the bridges. Not a lot of traffic out there right now. People were told to evacuate, get out of that area, and It looks like a few people are still left, still there. And despite warnings and mandatory evacuations, some people living on the Texas coast say they're not leaving. Jaleesa Irizarry spoke with two people who decided to stay and lived through a pretty nasty storm last year.
Well, the sandbags are out and the tarp is up here on West Broadway in Beaumont, where some residents are riding out the storm. And this area is actually no stranger to destruction. This is video from last year when Tropical Storm Imelda rolled through the neighborhood. We caught up with Mark Mercado again, whose home was flooded last year, and his wife had to be rescued out of a window by boat. He says 1 year after Imelda, he feels better prepared with his sandbags and tarp, which is why he decided to stay.
I mean, being prepared is the main thing, you know, and just having neighbors and looking out for each other and praying to God. I mean, that's the most important thing, leaving it in God's hands, because, I mean, that's where it comes from, Mother Nature, you know. How can you prepare for Mother Nature?
A mandatory evacuation and curfew is in place in Beaumont, so city officials say if you do plan to stay and ride out this storm, stay inside and stay safe. Reporting on West Broadway, Jaleesa Irizarry, 12 News.
All right, here's another live look. This is Galveston Island again. It looks very similar to what we've seen over the last hour and a half or so. That storm again just to the east of here, which is good news for them as you're taking a look at one of the piers there. A lot of these piers right off Galveston Island suffered severe damage in their last big hurricane just a few years ago, as this storm is now taking aim at the coast of Texas and Louisiana, right at the border just to the east of here. So this would be on the west side of the storm. Now, we want to make sure anyone who has family or loved ones in this area is informed. So that's why we're on the air here on KVUE tonight. If anyone's evacuated perhaps to Austin, maybe they've tuned in to see how things are looking out there. That's why we are bringing you this extended coverage here tonight.
And now we want to check in with Bryce Newberry, who's live at COTA, where evacuees are staging right now before they go to hotels and shelters here in town. But Bryce, there were some sheltering issues a little bit earlier today.
Yeah, Quita, the line here is still very long of cars. You can see it behind me. It's shorter than it was earlier, but all of these cars are filled with evacuees. But if you walk with me this way, you can see, and Jackson, if you'll just show everyone all of the cars that are still out here. I just spoke with one of these drivers. They've been here since 11:30 this morning. 8 hours waiting in this line, in this heat, trying to figure out where they're going to stay tonight, all while knowing that a Category, possibly 5 hurricane is heading toward their homes. So I want to show you this video because there are some challenges for these evacuees out here. They are running out of gas sitting here with their air conditioners running. Others had to be pushed by the Austin Fire Department to keep moving through the line. And so you can see just how many cars were here, people slowly able to inch along. We were able to talk with some of those evacuees about why it was so important for them to get out of town and get to safety here in Austin.
We've been out here since 1, and it ain't really moved much. We're trying to see what's going to happen. They said that, you know, it's a little bit of process going on. They're running out of space.
We all waited to the last minute. But when they said you had to go, and it's going to be between you and God, we birthed off.
So we just saw someone from the Texas State Guard walking through here delivering some barbecue sandwiches to people while they wait. We've seen other first responders sharing water with these people who are waiting to figure out where they're going tonight. The city of Austin said earlier today that hotels are at capacity, but I just got off the phone with a city spokesperson a little while ago who said they've been working to secure additional rooms throughout the day. They're trying to get more, and as more become available, then those rooms are getting relayed over here to COTA. But that's why the line has been moving so slowly. And this evening, city leaders announced that they are going to be opening the convention center, possibly as early as tonight or otherwise first thing tomorrow morning, where more evacuees will be able to go. They're planning to house at least 100 evacuees there at the convention center, but there is no estimate for sure when it's going to open, possibly tonight or tomorrow morning. But for now, these people are still waiting, hoping to figure out some hotel in this Travis County where they can go and stay tonight.
Bryce, we can see the line of cars there behind you. Are there people with the city or with COTA or officials of any type giving these people an idea of the time they're going to be waiting or what they're looking forward to as far as time goes? How are they relaying that information?
So, Brian, when you pull into the parking lot over that way, there's actually a sign that says hotels in the Austin area are at capacity. But I spoke with a lot of these evacuees in their cars, and they just wanted to know who's running this. Is it the city? Is it the state? Who is in charge? So they were a bit confused about exactly who they could talk to about their challenges. But we do see a lot of different city officials out here. Like I mentioned, the Texas State Guard also here. And then there's this issue of wristbands. So some people have already booked their hotel rooms or they have a place to stay, but in order to get the voucher that the state's providing for them to stay in those hotels, they have to get the wristbands. So some people could be waiting over at their hotels, relaxing, watching what's going on back at home, but instead they're in this line because they have to get some wristbands, which is also part of the process for evacuating and staying in the hotels in the Austin area.
And Bryce, just seeing that massive line of cars behind you, it looks like many of those people may be staying out there throughout the evening, throughout the night. Would that be the case? Would they be allowed to do that?
Well, so when I talked to the city a little while ago, I asked how late will COTA stay open for cars to continue arriving here, and there wasn't a time that it's supposed to be closing. In fact, there have been more cars pulling in just while we've been talking to you on the air here. So they are trying to get them through here, and like I said, the line is a lot shorter than what it was earlier. But again, Jackson, if you just want to show, there's 2 rows of cars basically. So each one is moving at its own space a little bit differently into how fast it's moving. These are some people that are here from Beaumont, Port Arthur, Galveston, and carloads of families. I saw a lot of kids out here earlier. Kids were trying to cool off, run around outside of the car, just do anything to stay busy while waiting to get to the front of the line.
All right, Bryce, thank you so much for being with us tonight. We appreciate it. And we have been bringing you continuous coverage of Hurricane Laura getting ready to make landfall on the Texas coast, and we will be bringing you that coverage throughout the evening. Stick with us. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
I have moderate to severe plaque psoriasis.
Welcome back, everyone. We are jumping in tonight with our special coverage of Hurricane Laura. We've got Chief Meteorologist Erika Lopez here with us, along with meteorologist Hunter Williams, to help track this storm.
Erika, you just got an update. Nothing much changed as far as the severity of the storm. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the latest update came in at 8 p.m. from the National Hurricane Center, and what has changed is the pressure. We were talking about the pressure earlier that has dropped about 3 millibars. So we measured pressure in millibars. The previous advisory had it at 940 millibars. It has dropped at 937 millibars. That's not necessarily good. The lower that number goes, that means the stronger the system is, and it still has a few hours in the open Gulf of Mexico water to potentially intensify and increase in strength. So the winds technically are still sustained, max sustained winds at 150 miles an hour. As far as what we're tracking, the movement still to the north-northwest, which is why we're expecting landfall somewhere along the Texas-Louisiana coast late tonight, if not potentially overnight, as it moves to 15 miles an hour in that trajectory. So here's a look at satellite. I wanted to point out satellite and just show you that this storm is about 80 miles off from making landfall, but a lot of the rain is barely starting to creep in southern Louisiana. So Texas, we're actually kind of on the drier side at this time. We did have some rain bands generate some pockets of moderate to heavy showers, but now the majority of the activity is barely starting to move inland. There are some bands that are producing rotation and some quick spin up tornadoes are possible. That is just northeast of Baton Rouge. So that's why as meteorologists, we always talk about the front right quadrant of a hurricane and how that's the most dangerous. And here's the reason why this is dangerous for this scenario, because we have moisture that's wrapping around this area of low pressure. It's basically sucking in a lot of Gulf moisture, and that's also bringing the majority of the energy on that front right quadrant where we have the quick spin-ups within these rain bands. So right now we have 3 active tornado warnings. Yes, tornadoes are a threat when we talk about hurricanes. It's not only the flooding threat, it's not only the the strong winds and also storm surge, there's also tornado threat. Houston's not seeing much right now for us. Any rain that tried to make its way into our area, it's just kind of dissipated because it's battling some drier air. Let's take you through future track and let you know how tonight's going to play out. We'll be tracking it all live here and also digitally. We expect landfall late tonight. This is our HRRR computer model. Somewhere near the Texas and Louisiana state line, a lot of the computer models are keeping landfall in southwest Louisiana, though. And then it's going to ride up that state line, still bringing in the heaviest of the concern, which will be flash flooding, still a tornado threat into early tomorrow morning. Jason Michael will be tracking that here on KVUE on daybreak. And then notice the storm, it holds together. We're likely still talking about a tropical storm, Laura, late tomorrow night, making its way through Arkansas as it continues to push forward. So my least concern with this storm is flooding. Now it's still going to happen. We're still going to have localized areas that pick up possibly up to a foot of rain, but that's common when we're talking about tropical systems. Yes, it causes big issues, but computer models are keeping numbers for widespread rainfall around half a foot, but isolated areas, depending who gets stuck under those rain bands, could pick up to a foot of rain. Now, here's my biggest concern. After it makes landfall tonight as a Cat 4, my biggest concern is going to be the storm surge, and it's also going to be the winds. And this is the reason why. Because of winds, when we're talking about a Category 4 with sustained winds from 130 to 156 miles an hour, and right now we have sustained winds at 150, so it is a very strong Category 4, but these winds are sitting on top of you for hours. So yes, we deal with these types of winds when we have tornadoes, but think of it that tornadoes, they are a couple of minutes in one isolated spot. They're moving fast and they're very small and very isolated compared to a hurricane. So we're talking a giant strong tornado, which is an giant area of low pressure sitting on top of you with sustained winds, and homes in these areas and buildings in these areas and a lot of trees that could cause damage with sustained winds of 150 miles an hour. That's going to cause a lot of damage to homes, trees, and also power lines. We're talking power outages that could last potentially for weeks, which is why we really stress the fact that you should be prepared for the possibility of power outages, because that's why hurricane kits are so important. A lot of water, a lot of non-perishable foods. Be prepared without electricity for that long of time, because it could be at sometimes even months before you have restoration in some isolated spots. That has occurred before. Okay, storm surge. This is the second issue that I'm dealing with this system, and one of my major concerns, because storm surge, it is one of the most deadly components when we're talking about hurricanes. Right now we're expecting storm surge of up to 20 feet. Now when we see storm surge of 12 feet, that easily is going to inundate your first floor of your home. If you have a 2-story home, then 20 feet is easily going into the second story of your home. And this is why it's deadly. This is why it's going to be a catastrophic situation, especially for folks that are close to the center of circulation, which would be along the Texas state line, and then extending eastward. We're talking about several hundred miles that will have the possibility of storm surge for the coastal areas of up to 20 feet. So here's a look at the warnings that are in effect right now. Maroon shaded colors, hurricane warnings, and it moves all the way inland, almost to the northern border of Louisiana, as we'll be tracking this system riding up the storm. Austin, we stay on the dry side here in central Texas. We'll actually get the drier, hotter side of this system, and we'll be lucky if we get some lingering showers later this week, and that will be wraparound moisture that just happens to make it into central Texas. So here's a quick look at your 7-day forecast locally. Not much impacts. It's our friends to the east of us that will be watching as Category 4 Hurricane Laura approaches and is expected to make landfall late tonight.
Thank you, Erica. And let's take another live look out there. And you can see not a lot of cars, still some cars, but not a lot out there in Galveston tonight. Again, a major storm taking aim at the Texas-Louisiana coast. And you can see the waves are really starting to sort of build up there. Even since we did it even since our 6 o'clock news, when we showed a shot from Galveston, the waves were relatively calm. Things are different right now. They've really started to kick up a lot. You can see out there on the pier, they're really hitting it. And a little earlier when we showed this picture, there were actually people on the pier. Bad idea. Very bad idea, guys, because you know, once the waves get rough and they start really coming in, who knows what can happen. Just talk for you.
Okay, here we go. Now we got it. Again, you're watching extended coverage here on KVUE as we prepare for our neighbors to our east dealing with this hurricane. You're taking a live look at Galveston Island once again, which is to the west of where the serious storm is going to be. But Erica's been talking about that storm surge, and this, in my mind at least, I picture something akin to a tidal wave of water. This is kind of a gradual thing. As senior reporter Tony Plahetsky joins us now. Tony, you've covered hurricanes, 3 major hurricanes, in fact, right along the Gulf Coast. You're from the Gulf Coast. You know how these things work. And that storm surge is something that a lot of people are talking about. Kind of explain the damage that leaves behind when you've got a storm surge like this in a hurricane.
Well, you know, Brian, and all 3 major hurricanes that I've covered through the years, beginning with Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans in 2005, of course, that was a very different situation because of the levee break in New Orleans. But looking back at Hurricanes Rita and Hurricane Ike, that of course impacted the Texas coast, one of the things that I absolutely remember is that in the aftermath of those 2 hurricanes, walking along areas, not along the beach per se, but far inland. I'm talking about miles inland. And you could see in certain situations how this wall of water that we hear meteorologists like Erika and Hunter talking about, literally almost as you describe, a tidal wave. They are so strong that they can move homes off their foundations. In some situations, we were actually able to see what was left of homes, and it was not very much because the homes had actually been shifted off their foundation and in some cases actually washed away by this wall of water. You know, Brian and Quita, one of the things that I've really been noticing today and paying attention to, and it has sort of sent a cold chill up my spine, and that is when we think about and look back at those major hurricanes, the ones that I've covered in the past, we saw these mass evacuations. We had days and days and days of warnings. And what we have not seen in this case, and granted, this is a much more rural area where the storm is expected to make landfall, but at the same time, we've not seen highways clogged with traffic, for example, and we are not seeing the same types of mass evacuations that we have seen with some of these other storms over the past decade to 15 years that have impacted the Texas coast. And so I know a lot of emergency managers are sharing the concern that frankly I have about whether or not people are heeding the warnings to evacuate, but also the fact that this storm has grown in such rapid intensity so fast. Maybe people at this point have simply not had time to gather their belongings, gather their most prized possessions, and get on the road.
Senior reporter Tony Plahetsky with us. Tony, while we've got you, if you can hear me, I don't know, Quita, is your microphone on?
I'm not sure. I think it is. I think it is.
Let me ask you this, Tony. You've been in the aftermath of the storm. We spend a lot of time preparing for the storm, but the real issues, of course, come during and after. When you were there on the ground after these major hurricanes, just kind of explain to people what that's like. You think, you know, without power is one thing, without water is another thing. There are several issues people in this area around Lake Charles, even as far west as Beaumont, are going to be dealing with for days and weeks to come.
And Brian, that's one reason that evacuations are so important. It's not only because of your personal safety, but I've got to tell you, after a hurricane passes, it is a pretty miserable situation, and I honestly can't state that enough. Not only do you not have the comforts of life, you don't have air conditioning, you don't have a hot meal, you don't have toilet facilities. And so when I've covered storms in the past, you know, I lived for a week off power bars and bottled water and that type of thing. It is also extremely hot. It is exponentially hotter than you think it is going to be. We are in the dead of summer right now, and once the storm passes, really there's no air conditioning or no comforts to be had. And at the same time, that's just the physical part of it. I can remember interviewing people as they were going back to their homes for the first time, and Brian, I mean, just remembering that it makes me emotional, frankly, because you find people who live in these small towns, and in some cases these small fishing villages, who frankly had meager means to begin with, and then when you see them going back to their home to frankly pick up what is left behind, it's very sobering. It is a very sobering reminder of what Mother Nature is capable of.
And sometimes they didn't have anything left to pick up. It's so sad. Tony, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And let's take a look at some video from the hurricane hunters. They're the ones who flew into the storm yesterday to get a better idea of what this storm looks like and the way that it will affect the coast. Wow, that is amazing. Look at that video. And they don't fly over it. I believe they fly, I think either Hunter or Erika might be able to tell me a little bit more about how they actually get in there and gather this information.
Yeah, so they fly over and into the storm. So then they drop the radio sound, which collects all of the data, and that's going to give us the latest information on the wind speeds and also the pressure. And also then that's the information that we're relaying to you guys, sometimes at an instant. And that's what lets us know, is the storm strengthening? Is it weakening? That's the type of scenario that obviously will make a big difference also with the trajectory of this storm, letting us know if this storm is heading to the north, to the west. So a lot of data. We respect hurricane hunters greatly as they do this very safely. They're all professionals, and they're the reasons why we can relay all of this data to you guys. So it's pretty incredible what they do whenever they pick up this data.
All right, it is so fascinating.
It really is. I don't know if I'd be able to do it. But we also heard from the head of the state's emergency management department today, and he says this storm, it's going to move through quickly, but it is very different than the ones Texans have dealt with in recent years.
And I need to reemphasize the danger factor of this storm. It's been a while since we've seen Cat 3, Cat 4 winds in Texas. We know the damage that does. Power restoration, Governor, will be longer and what we would normally expect because of the high winds. You said yesterday that this is not a Harvey storm. We completely agree with that. The rainfall will be different, but the winds will be very important for us to watch. Even though more people lose their lives during surge or flood events, in this event, I'm really worried about the wind just as you are. Our rescue personnel are available. They will be hunkered down through the hours of the storm. I know that they will risk their lives to get out there.
All right, another live look. This is Galveston Island on this eve of the hurricane approaching the Gulf Coast. Hotels, of course, filling up fast all across central Texas, even North Texas for that matter. Texas Department of Emergency Management set up what they call reception centers as a new way to handle storm evacuees. Erika Lopez looked at how cities around the state are helping take in those evacuees.
In San Antonio, buses of Hurricane Laura evacuees arrived early Wednesday morning to this parking lot. Austin, evacuees lined up outside the Circuit of America's racetrack.
We had to go somewhere safe and everybody was willing to go.
Some evacuees were turned away until emergency management could find more space. In the Dallas-Fort Worth area, evacuees have two options, nearby Mesquite, Texas, or Knights of Columbus Hall in Ellis County.
We want to do everything we can to help out here.
But when you look at all of these locations, what you're seeing is a new way to respond. These are reception centers. It's places to process evacuees. The people will sleep in a nearby hotel.
We have the capacity, at least for now.
This response is something researchers like Christy Dahl studies.
Absolutely.
She co-authored a study of evacuation scenarios during a pandemic. Her report shows evacuees should go to areas with low virus transmission rates, less populated centers.
Here, Governor Greg Abbott is highly encouraging folks to stay in hotels. Really, most people are being sent to some of the most populous areas, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio. Should they be having these vouchers at hotels in smaller cities?
Absolutely. This year, more than in past years, the best thing we can do is be getting people into hotels where they're relatively isolated from other people.
Her data shows evacuee placement can drastically impact COVID-19 numbers, going from a few thousand excess cases to more than 50,000.
Yeah, that's a big range of cases.
It is.
Last report, the amount of people staying in a state-funded hotel room is 3,309 people, not just a statistic. It's Texans hoping to return home to live a safe, healthy life. I'm Erika Lopez.
That was our Erika Lopez reporting. I want to pass along some additional information with regards to the latest advisory on Laura. As we discussed earlier, the pressure continues to drop, now down to 937 millibars. I know it's a little complicated, but essentially the lower that number, the stronger the storm, and it's starting to get in rare company. Now, assuming that this system makes landfall in Louisiana and not just across the border in Texas, there have only been 3 storms on record with that pressure or lower. Number 1 was Katrina, had pressure down to 920 millibars. The last island hurricane, that was way back in the 1800s. And then Hurricane Rita, which we've been talking a lot about tonight, with pressure at 937 millibars. So now we'll toss things over to Erika. The storm, as we've been talking about, starting to be in rare company, it appears.
Yeah, so it's very interesting, and what a lot of folks don't realize is that, yes, this system, it's just a very strong area of low pressure. We as meteorologists talk about low pressure systems a lot. They're associated with cold fronts. They drag in cold fronts when we're talking about the fall season. And then as far as what we're tracking with this, millibars at 937. Well, that is what's fueling the system, bringing in a lot of energy from the Gulf of Mexico, and that's why we have wraparound moisture around this with a lot of thunderstorm activity, flash flooding concerns, and then we get wind speeds sustained as strong as 150 miles an hour. That is surrounding the eye of this hurricane. So right now the system's moving to the north-northwest at 15 miles an hour. This is something we're watching very, very closely because because depending how long it takes a north-northwest path, or if it starts to shift to the north, that's going to give us our exact landfall location. And that is why it is very difficult to pinpoint the exact landfall place. But the National Hurricane Center has done a great job with forecasting this, with how difficult it's been. There's been so many ingredients that this storm has had to get through, so many hurdles. If you remember when we were tracking Laura earlier this week, it passed through a lot of Caribbean islands, made its way through Cuba, islands that are very mountainous that were trying to tear apart this storm, and we were concerned what path this would take, if it did take more of a path closer to Florida, or if it was just going to go right into the open waters of the Gulf of Mexico. And that's the path it took, which is why the forecast changed, and we finally had to up the intensity for this system from a Cat 3 now to a Cat 4, and getting very, very close to a Cat 5. But I think this storm is closing in. It still has the possibility of becoming a Cat 5 storm, although time is starting to wind down. Now we have a few more hours before this system will make landfall. We expect it to make landfall late tonight, if not very, very early tomorrow morning. It's about 80 miles off the coast, the Louisiana coast. We're expecting a landfall somewhere along the state line at this time. But I also want to point out that we haven't had much rain so far with this. The greatest threat is going to be winds. We do have tropical storm force winds that are already being picked up in southern Louisiana, and then hurricane force winds extend about 60 miles outside of the eye wall. So that 150-mile-an-hour winds that we keep on talking about, that's just the strongest winds that we see that are sustained very close to the eye wall. It's not necessarily extending all the way out. And then hurricane force winds extend about 60 miles out, and hurricane force winds are winds of up to 74 miles an hour. So again, just keep in mind, that's why the eye is very, very dangerous. Although it's very calm right in the center of the eye on the exterior outer parts of the eye wall, that is where the strongest of the winds are. Okay, we have still some active tornado warnings that are in effect right now. One of them just northeast of Baton Rouge. That's where we've seen the majority of the tornado activity. As far as west of this system, this is why we call it the dry, the cleaner side of the system. What it's doing, it's wrapping around moisture. So we have counterclockwise rotation. So we have moisture that's filtering in from the Gulf of Mexico. That's wrapping around the system. But now we're picking up a northerly wind that's just bringing in drier air, and that's helping dissipate. That's why all of this rain shower activity, it's just kind of vanished. It's being sucked in with drier air, and that's helping eliminate any of that rain shower activity to continue for us here in Central Texas. That's why our rainfall accumulation is going to be very, very minimal. Wanted to point out something very quickly before I let you guys go and we turn things over to a little bit of a break. But we are seeing some stronger winds, and it's very interesting actually, because south of I-10, do you see where these purple shaded colors are? That's tropical storm force winds that are starting to pick up. But south of I-10, we actually don't have any weather stations that can collect data because it's so swampy in this area. So that's why we don't have any data coming in. But what we do have is that purple shaded color indicating we're likely seeing a lot of tropical storm force winds that are picking up there, but gusts of up to 35 miles an hour out in the Galveston area. I think winds will be our greatest concern with this, along with storm surge. As far as our flooding threat, as the storm moves inland, it will be there. We will have rivers and bayous that get backed up. That will also be associated because of the storm surge, allowing that backup to occur. But this storm is moving very quickly, which is great news for flooding threats, because the quicker this system moves out, then the quicker we can get done with the rain and get back to picking up the aftermath of this storm. So we'll toss things to break and be back with more on Hurricane Laura.
Welcome back. You're watching extended coverage here of Hurricane Laura as the hurricane approaches the Gulf Coast of Texas and Louisiana. This a live look as the sun has now set in Galveston on Galveston Island. Not much activity taking place. Many people in that part of the state, of course, have evacuated, many of them coming here to central Texas. In fact, as you can see, just a few cars on the highway there on the seawall of Galveston Island on this Wednesday night. Again, Hurricane Laura now a Category 4 storm just on the brink of Category 5. That, of course, mainly dealing with the wind speed. 157-mile-an-hour winds sustained would be a Category 5 storm. Of course, just shy of that right now, making Hurricane Laura a Category 4 storm. You can see on the right-hand side of your screen down in the bottom corner, that is live radar as we are just hours away from landfall as the storm approaches the Texas and Louisiana coast. Again, here's a look at landfall between midnight and 1 a.m. That's when we're expecting landfall. That's when the outer edge of that eye wall hits land, and it will come onto land at the coast of Texas, right at the border between Texas and Louisiana, just to the east of Beaumont and Port Arthur. Of course, the storm surge, as Erika and Hunter have been talking about, is the big concern with this storm. It's a pretty fast-moving hurricane if you compare it to past hurricanes like Harvey 3 years ago. That storm surge, though, is going to be very, very devastating to that part of Louisiana, in southwest Louisiana, and of course in southeast Texas. The Austin Convention Center is being prepped, as you can see here from our graphic, for any evacuees to have somewhere to stay as this storm is moving in overnight tonight. Now, we told you earlier some evacuees turned away here in Austin early this morning after spending hours on the road. Here's what state leaders say led to that problem.
I did talk to the city of Austin this morning. Here's their explanation of what happened. They had booked hotel rooms and reserved them through the process, but because we have been asking people to evacuate, some people went straight to hotel rooms. So while we had believed we had rooms reserved, those rooms were being filled up by other people that were evacuating. At 5 o'clock this morning, City of Austin shut down COTA. They reopened at 10 a.m. this morning. And if we have to open up the convention center here, we've already talked to them about having a place to temporarily put people until we stabilize out the local hotel rooms. Now, we're also using hotels in Hayes County and in Williamson County, and we'll probably be pushing some up into Bell County as well. So there are still plenty of hotel rooms available. This is trying to balance out the load right now of regular people driving their own cars and reserving hotels, as well as those that we are trying to work on people coming to us for locations. So we'll get this balanced out. We will have plenty of places. For instance, in Dallas, they're only at 39% occupancy right now. There are plenty of hotel rooms across the state of Texas, and we're just going to keep load balancing this out as we get people out of harm's way.
And now let's go to our own Bryce Newberry. He's live at COTA, where the evacuees are staging tonight before they're supposed to be going to hotels and different shelters around town. I know, Bryce, a little earlier you had showed us that there was a huge line of cars behind you of people who'd been waiting, some as long as, since 11 o'clock this afternoon, just trying to get a hotel room, trying to find shelter for themselves and their families. So there were some big sheltering issues happening today.
Yeah, Quita, that's right. That family that I told you about last time you checked in, they were on that side of the curve, and I just saw them again, and they just got around to this side of the curve. So it's slowly moving along, but as Brian just mentioned, the convention center is getting ready to open. The state, as well as the Red Cross, are helping to get that set up. And the goal, from what I've been told, is that the convention center will be open and ready to start accepting people, some of these evacuees tonight. But the city is still working to get hotel rooms just to continue to meet the need of people who are arriving here at COTA from some of those evacuation areas.
And Bryce, approximately how many people would you say you've seen come through so far?
Well, Quita, it's been a pretty steady stream of cars, and to be honest with you, I didn't count, but some data that we got from the city just a little bit ago here is that there are approximately 3,000 evacuees that are being housed in the Austin-Travis County area. So far, as of this morning, taking up more than 1,000 hotel rooms throughout the city. But like I said, it's been a steady stream of cars. The line has shrunk a little bit, but still, there's quite a few people out here waiting to get a room tonight.
Hey, Bryce, you've had a chance to talk to some of the people there. I would assume the fear of what's happening at their homes is on their minds. This has got to be frustrating for them. What is it like for those people now? What kind of stories are they telling you about their day and what they're going through?
Well, they keep telling me it's been a very long day. For many of these people, they evacuated yesterday or earlier this morning, but you have to think about when they were evacuating and how much traffic there was getting out of those areas. So it took them a lot longer to get to Austin in the first place, and then once they did get here, they're greeted with this very long and slow line. So there are some people definitely frustrated. Hot, it's very hot, of course. There are also some people who say, you know what, we're just glad that we evacuated when we did, because when we heard the governor go on TV earlier today and say how worried the state was about what was coming for Texas, they heard that and they knew they had to get out of town as quickly as they could. So it's kind of a mix of both. Obviously, people are ready to go home, get to a hotel actually, and relax.
All right, Bryce, thank you so much. And we want to throw it now to Chief Meteorologist Erika Lopez. She's been keeping an eye on Hurricane Laura right now. And Erika, tell us the latest.
Yeah, we're about 25 minutes from the next advisory that will be issued by the National Hurricane Center. So since we're so close to landfall, advisories are coming out every single hour, and those advisories tell us the updated wind speeds associated with this storm, the updated pressure. Is it dropping? Is it sustaining? And also where this storm is moving right now, it continues to move to the north-northwest at 15 miles an hour, and the pressure is at 937 millibars. So the last advisory, the 7 p.m. advisory, the pressure was at 940 millibars. So that shows me that this storm is still strengthening, and it is still in an area that's conducive for development. Now, what's on our side is time, the lack of time that this storm continues to have over the open Gulf of Mexico water. The quicker it hits land, the quicker it makes landfall, then that storm will finally start to weaken at a very rapid pace. So lots of questions regarding landfall. I threw in spaghetti plots on this graphic to show you we have agreement that this storm is going to make landfall somewhere along the Texas-Louisiana coast. This shows all of our most popular computer models that we use to forecast the storm. There's still a couple of outliers, though, that do have a Texas landfall, but this is something we'll be eyeing very, very closely. And what will make the difference with this is the path it's taking. Right now, it's moving to the north-northwest. We need a northerly turn for that to be a northern landfall or southwest Louisiana. And the good news is that this area, it's not very populated. Yes, we do have loved ones, we do have family and friends that live in these regions, but we were very concerned if it was going to shift a little bit further west. And Houston, Galveston, we know a lot of folks with an area that's extremely populated. That would have caused a big issue. So best case scenario will be that this storm rides up along the state line at a rapid pace at 15 miles an hour. So that means it's going to move out of the region quicker. But we still have strong hurricane force winds of up to 150 mile an hour, sustained winds around the eye of that storm, and then deadly storm surge. So that's why storm surge and also winds are going to be our greatest threat with this, with widespread power outages for anyone who's in the path of this storm, especially on the east side of the storm. We talk about the dirty side of the storm. This is the most dangerous side. Heaviest of the rainfall and also strongest of the winds will be on the east side of this storm. That means Lake Charles is going to get the brunt of this devastation, and also Shreveport, possibly still talking about a Cat 4 hurricane by tomorrow around lunchtime. We'll be tracking that as it continues to ride up the Texas and Louisiana state line, and then a flash flooding threat is still possible for folks out in Arkansas as the system rides up north. Now for us, that puts us locally on the drier side of this storm, but this is why us as meteorologists, we tell you don't just focus on the cone of uncertainty. The cone is forecasting landfall for the eye of the hurricane, but we see how wide the system is. This system actually is several hundred miles wide, over 700 miles wide exact if you factor in the outer rain bands with it. So this is why we have warnings that extend all the way from the middle Texas coast all the way into southeastern parts of Louisiana for tropical storm force winds that are possible within these regions. Hurricane force winds are going to extend couple of 100 miles out, possibly. At this time, we are reporting hurricane force winds within about 60 miles from the eye of that wall, and then that warning extends all the way up north, because as this storm quickly pushes north, folks along the state line of Texas, Louisiana, as it travels north, will be feeling those hurricane force winds as a Category 4 storm continues to make landfall late tonight. Storm surge, that is another one of my major concerns, and here's the reason why. It is very deadly. It's going to be dark. It's late at night. That's one of my biggest concerns also, that there is no sun to help you see with this scenario, and especially for folks who chose not to evacuate. Storm surge is the most deadly component when we're talking about hurricane, and the storm surge warning goes inland about 60 miles. We're talking about the possibility of storm surge as high as 20 feet to extend all the way about 30 miles inland. So this is going to flood homes. This is going to possibly bring the loss of life for folks. And then the areas that deal with the worst of the storm surge will be along the center of circulation and just east of the center of circulation. That's where we could have storm surge as high as 20 feet. Now, just to put that into perspective, I know they're numbers for folks in Central Texas. We don't necessarily deal with storm surge issues, but if we have a storm surge of about 12 feet, that's going to completely inundate your first level of your home if you have a 2-story home. When we have storm surge of 20 feet, that could possibly take over your 2-story home. So this is why it becomes such a huge scenario. This is why we're likely going to be waking up to the possibility of water rescues tomorrow because of storm surge, and then widespread power outages because of the wind threat. Those are my 2 biggest concerns. On top of that, yes, we're going to have heavy rain and flash flooding on isolated areas, but the storm surge is also going to back up rivers, bayous, and anything that would help filter out this water into the Gulf of Mexico. Here's the latest right now as we're tracking Hurricane Laura, which is a Category 4 hurricane moving inland. It's about 80 miles, possibly closer to about 75 miles at this time, because it is moving at 15 miles an hour. And we do still have some active tornado warnings that have been on and off across the area. As for Austin, we're on the drier side. We actually have a north wind that filters in, and that helps dissipate a lot of the rain chances or a lot of the rain bands that try to make their way wrapping around that area of low pressure. Winds that are picking up right now, I'm seeing steadily increasing winds sustained right now at about 36 miles an hour. Wind gusts being reported out in Lake Charles. So we need wind speeds at about 39 miles an hour to officially feel those tropical storm force winds. But as far as what we're tracking right now, here's a look at your forecast rainfall. We could see spots across Louisiana into Arkansas that could easily pick up a foot. But Hunter, I'm happy that flooding isn't going to be one of our biggest threats, but again, it's going to be the damaging winds and also the storm surge that I'm really concerned about tonight.
Yeah, I think the fact that the storm is moving so fast, Erica, that helps with limiting the flood potential. But I wanted to talk a bit more about that with you. One of the storms that I know you've covered, Harvey, and this is a different storm in a lot of ways, especially given that this storm is moving fast, so it's not the same flood threat. I want to know if you could talk a little bit about your experience with Harvey and how you see this as kind of a different setup.
Yeah, so it's interesting because we hear a lot of people, they try to compare storms, right? But it's so hard to compare storms because every single storm is so different. They all have their different characteristics. Harvey was a very interesting situation because it did make landfall as a major hurricane across Texas, but then it went straight to Houston and just sat on top of Houston as a tropical storm. But this is why we can't just focus on what category is it, because right now, yes, we're talking about Category 4 storm, but if it were to sit on top of us, we're talking about a flooding threat and a wind threat. Now, Harvey, it did not bring that wind threat for the Houston area, but it did bring that flooding threat as it just sat in that area. And we talk about the feeder bands, especially if it sits on top of an area close to the Gulf Coast. Well, we have wraparound moisture that is just regenerating on top of the same place versus this storm that's quickly going to continue to push to the north. So that's going to be kind of our saving grace with a major flooding event with this storm.
Yeah, so the flooding is obviously one of the impacts. So you were talking about Harvey, one of the storms that you've covered. Back in 2018, I was covering Michael when it moved in through the Florida Panhandle and then ultimately into Georgia. Although the flooding threat is normally not quite as substantial with these fast-moving storms, you do also have to watch out for the inland wind threat because they're moving so fast, so it's not as much time for the winds to weaken down. On your screen, you're looking at the cone, which again brings this right along the state line and then likely into northern Louisiana. And with these storms, you have a Cat 4. Those winds don't spin down automatically. And when I was covering Michael, we had a swath of winds that was about 120 to 150 miles inland from where the storm made landfall, and it still looked almost like a tornado had gone through. So that's something that I've seen, Erika, with these systems, especially the ones that are moving faster. Is the flood threat is significant? Oftentimes, no, but you do still have to watch the wind threat, and because it's moving faster, it's not just along the coast, but you got to watch that inland too.
Yeah, you know what's interesting, this graphic that we have up right now, so we see a Cat 4 making landfall, but then it drops down to a tropical storm in northern Louisiana. But that's because computer models are keeping this as possibly a Cat 4 all the way into Louisiana until it starts to finally lose its steam. So we're talking 150-mile-an-hour sustained winds from the Gulf Coast inland several hundred miles. And you bring up a good point. That's something that people don't think about when they think, oh, I'm so far inland to Louisiana, we're not going to get that big of an issue. But that's going to be a huge issue and concern, I think, with Hurricane Laura. You're right on target with that.
Yeah, and we're still going to need to watch the storm surge. I've been looking at some of the gauges, the Sabine Pass water gauge. I've been looking at Lake Charles, and the system is just now starting to get close enough that where we'll be watching that over the next couple of hours and seeing what the water levels are doing there. Again, here's a look at the storm surge warnings and the forecast there. And the way this works, as Erika was saying, this is kind of like a wall of water. So where you get the highest storm surge, that's going to be for areas from the center of the storm and then just off to the right. That's where you're going to get that greatest onshore push of water. And that's where you see in the forecast 15 to 20 feet of storm surge is possible over parts of coastal Louisiana, and that could make it very far inland. The topography here, this is, remember, very swampy, the bayous there, the lakes. It's essentially the coastal plains, and that's why when you get a big significant push of water like this, especially from a major Cat 4, maybe even a Cat 5 hurricane, it can make it not just an issue for the immediate coast, but even sometimes for areas even farther inland. And again, just getting back to some of the historical perspective on this, I think it's always so interesting with these major hurricanes. This is an area that's had its fair share of tropical issues, don't get me wrong, but this is not an area that's seen a Category 4 or a Category 5 landfall. Where you see these yellow and red dots, that's where the Category 4 and 5 storms have made landfall in the continental United States since records began. So that goes back to the 1800s. And right here across the state line, unfortunately, later on tonight, we'll be adding a yellow dot to that location, hopefully not a red dot, but it's possible. But this is not an area that has seen that so much in the past. Let's take you back to the recon observations, and we talked about the pressure differences a bit ago. So the latest advisory has the lowest pressure at 937. What the hurricane hunters that are flying there now, at least in their previous past, they found pressure that could be down as low as 935 millibars. So the lower that number, the stronger the storm, the pressure tends to drop sooner, and then sometimes the winds can lag a bit behind. We don't need this to strengthen anymore, but this is a storm that unfortunately looks like it could be holding intensity, if not strengthening, right on through landfall, which we're expecting now probably in a matter of 5 hours or so, closer to about 1 a.m. tonight, and we'll be watching that, of course, very closely. So lots going on tonight with the center of the storm. Let's measure this out, actually, and we'll see how far off the coastline this is. As of the latest update, this is the time where you stop looking at models and you just look at the observations as this stuff gets a little bit closer. So you can see now the northern tip of the eye wall, we're talking just over 50 miles offshore. It's moving north-northwest at 15. So over the next several hours, it's continuing to be that time where this storm is going to be moving closer and closer. Erika will bring you back in again as we watch this moving closer. the strengthening, it could continue to strengthen. It, like you said, I think it's really a matter of time. With the storm moving this fast, I don't know that it necessarily is going to go all the way up to Cat 5, but at this point, it doesn't really matter. These are catastrophic winds either way. You don't want to get caught up in the classification of the storm.
That's exactly what I was going to say. At this point, does it really matter? We know we're going to have widespread power outages. And at this point, it is going to be catastrophic. So the information you're seeing on your screen right now, that's from the 8 p.m. advisory, but we are a few minutes away. The next advisory comes out at 9 p.m., although the National Hurricane Center is great and they usually bring that in a little bit earlier. So in just a few moments, if you continue to stay with us, we should have the latest data coming out from hurricane hunters. I do think there's a good chance that we could see wind speeds increase to about 155, which technically would still keep it at a Cat 4. But again, at this rate, it does not matter. We're going to have major storm surge. We're going to have major power outages for whoever is in the path of this storm. So I'm going to toss things over to Brian. What's going on, Brian?
All right, Erica, great job. Hunter, great job as always. Of course, we're keeping a close eye on the storm as it does approach the Louisiana coastline and very far southeastern Texas. A look here at the well, not much to see.
Actually, not too bad tonight. The surf is up, the wind is up, and the splash meter, if you will. We've been in this parking lot a while watching the surf come up over the seawall, and the splash keeps getting farther and farther into the parking lot. So that's some indication of how strong the winds and the surf have gone up. I can tell you throughout the course of the day at least, noticeably stronger, both the wind and the surf. Now, I'm on the seawall, if you're familiar with Galveston, after the Great Hurricane of 1900, the deadliest natural disaster in U.S. history, don't forget. Portions of the seawall were constructed immediately after that storm and were finished decades later. I'm standing on the very west end of the seawall. So imagine these huge waves and the wind in areas that are not protected by the seawall. We were down in Jamaica Beach, a town just to the west of Galveston, and water was inundating neighborhoods that are basically built right on the beach, basically sea level, if you will, and the water was coming into those neighborhoods. We have seen reports tonight of debris from the Gulf on the roadways, both on Bolivar Peninsula and across San Luis Pass on the other side of Galveston Island. So some minor concerns tonight, and city officials, you know, they wanted to err on the side of caution. They did order that mandatory evacuation yesterday, and many people heeded that warning. Fortunately, it looks like things will be quieter than we thought they might have been, and city officials still continue to be somewhat concerned about possible surge, not only on the beachfront, but on the bay side as well. Winds could kick up water on the bay side, but at this point, guys, things are looking okay, and I can tell you, I heard your discussion a little earlier about Hurricane Harvey. I was on Galveston 3 years ago covering Harvey, and then of course later in the more inland areas that were heavily impacted by that storm. I was soaked head to toe. No rain so far all day long. A little shower this morning here on the island, but since then no rain, and in fact the sun came out a little earlier before we started seeing things pick up out here in the Gulf. For now, we'll send it back to you.
Well, hey, Jason, it looked like you lucked out. You're not wet from head to toe this time around. And I know that Galveston had done the mandatory evacuations, like you said, just to be on the safe side. But have you seen people around? Have people been out on the piers, out on the beach, walking around?
Absolutely. Today we've seen some people out here in this parking lot, in fact. And Sergio, my photographer, is spinning around. You can see, I think, is that a patrol car? Sergio, people still come into this parking lot trying to get a shot of this this splash or even get splashed themselves. So we've seen a lot of people show up in swimsuits and such just to get this wave action on them. There is a curfew in place tonight in the city of Galveston. They issued a curfew for 3 nights in a row. It began at 8 p.m. tonight. They may end up canceling that tomorrow. We'll have to wait and see just how things turn out. But there is a curfew in place, and we've seen a Galveston patrol officer come through here several times to shoo people away, remind them that a curfew is indeed in place. But we have seen people milling about all day long. Now on the west end, beyond the seawall, many of the neighborhoods were ghost towns this afternoon. All the homes and businesses shuttered or boarded up as a precaution. And fortunately, those people will probably end up returning to see that their homes and businesses are not that damaged, thankfully.
That's great news. Jason, before we let you go, I do want to ask you, I know at certain places along the seawall, it's a pretty big drop-off between the top of the seawall, the edge of the wall, and the water below. How much have you seen that rise since you've been there?
Yeah, and I apologize. I think the light on me went out, so I may look darker than I should. But Sergio is going to walk a little closer to the edge of the seawall. The seawall, Sergio, do you know how many feet it is high?
At least 15.
At least 15 feet, wow. Sergio says, and he's been in the Houston market a lot longer than I have. So a pretty decent drop-off for sure. And this is what protects much of Galveston Island, is this massive public works project that was built over the years after that terrible storm of 1900 that so many people refer to still today. Just its sheer devastation on this island. People still remember, talk about it generations later, how terrible it was for this island, and they wanted to make sure at least it was protected in future storms, and it has certainly done its job over the years, guys.
All right, Jason Miles in Galveston tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jason.
And we're going to take another live look outside right now. This is Beaumont to the east of Houston, also expecting to take a major hit tonight, and that's where we will find our own Luis De Leon. He is in North Beaumont tonight. And Luis, how are things looking out there right now? I know we went to you 20 minutes ago, and it was actually sort of sunny. There was no rain. Things looked great.
That's right, Quita, and now it is nightfall and the sky is completely dark, but let me tell you, not much has changed since the last time you guys came to us. The winds are still relatively calm. This parking lot is still very empty. Actually, Heike, if you want to take a look back there's just a few cars here. We haven't really walked up to them quite yet. We are not sure if they are exactly empty or not, but these are really just the only few cars that are in this parking lot. We're really just trying to show you the whole scope of really how empty it is out here. We spent a lot of time in downtown Beaumont and in Port Arthur along that seawall, and it was really just so empty. I do want to show you a video here. You should be seeing a video on your screen of some rain actually from earlier today. That is me running into the hotel, and we're showing you this because that kind of rain is really just a normal hard rain, right? But try and imagine that with hurricane force winds. I'm trying to have that video sort of be a warning for people that this thing could really pack a punch with rain like that pouring down. You should also be seeing a time lapse on your screen now, and that's a time lapse of where we are tonight. Quita, you mentioned how clear it really was, and it really was sunny out today when we were down in Port Arthur and in downtown Beaumont, and even making our way back up here. A lot of those low-lying clouds, making their way overhead. Walk with me this way. We were showing you earlier about this big truck. We wanted to know what this big truck was doing here in this big old empty parking lot. This is a high water vehicle, if you will. You can see how patted down here this vehicle is. Look at the chains over here, really holding this thing down. Let's take a look at the back of the vehicle over here. See up there, there's that sticker that you see on some semis sometimes talking about some flammable objects. That's because this is carrying fuel to actually power up generators. We spoke to the operator of this truck. He's going to be staying here throughout the night and hunkering down right here for Hurricane Laura as it makes its way through. His name is Jim McWilliams. He's been doing this for around 7 to 8 hurricanes, he said. He's been doing this for quite some time. Just take a listen to what he said about why this is important to do.
Well, you just got to help out. You know, the phone companies are all going to need power tomorrow to keep the communications going, which is important.
So as you heard there, his plan usually is to go as soon as morning comes. For example, if a storm comes overnight, he'll wait and see where he's needed and he'll go right there. But he said he's going to stick it out here in this big empty parking lot. We're going to continue to bring you more coverage of the conditions out here. We are still a few hours out from landfall, but as you can see, for now, it is calm. Don't let that fool you, though. It's the calm before the storm, as they say. For now, live in North Beaumont, Luis De Leon, KVUE News.
Hey, Luis, while we've got you there, what has the wind been like as you've been there? You were in Port Arthur for a while. Now you've moved over further to the west to Beaumont. You're on the north side of town. What has the wind been like as you've seen it today?
Yeah, so I was trying to explain that a little bit earlier, how inconsistent it is in certain parts. So when we were on the seawall, it really was rather windy. Of course, we are by a body of water, so naturally it is going to be a little bit windier there. But that was at a moment where that first line of storms actually came up and then actually developed a little bit more in Louisiana from what I saw. And that goes along with that rain that occurred when I was running into the hotel in that video. So my point there is that I think that wind that was a little bit windier there was just before that line of storms rolled through. When we were in downtown Beaumont, the wind did start to pick up quite a bit, but ever since then we came up here. It was windy before and it tapered back down, and now it is very calm out here. And I will also say that the humidity dropped maybe just a little bit. It still feels very unstable, if you will, out here, but I will say that the temperature has dropped just a bit.
All right, Luis, thank you very much. Stay safe out there. We appreciate you. And live team coverage of Hurricane Laura continues after this quick break. Stay with us. Welcome back to special coverage of Hurricane Laura tonight. We're still a couple of hours away from landfall, and we just want to keep people updated. I know y'all have a lot of people and relatives and friends, family living out there in Southeast Texas, maybe on the coast of Louisiana. We want to make sure everyone has all the information they need to stay safe. So we're going to give you a little reset on what we've been talking about tonight. Hurricane Laura, now a Category 4 storm. That could change. We should be getting another update pretty soon. It seems to be strengthening, and it's set to make landfall at around midnight to 1 a.m. Now, meteorologists, experts, the governor of Texas calling this an unsurvivable storm. It will have an unsurvivable storm surge. It's going to bring a lot of damage to areas around Texas and the Louisiana coast. Now, the storm surge could go as much as 40 miles inland. Evacuees are being brought inland, many here to Austin, and quite a few of them staying in hotels. And Austin is prepping the convention center right now to serve as an additional shelter.
Erika Lopez is with us, as she has been all day today. You were just talking about the radar, and it appears that the rain event with this hurricane might not be as great as maybe we expected.
Well, you know, we've actually been saying that it's not going to be a huge rain event. It's the wind threat and also the storm surge, right? Computer models have been suggesting we could easily only pick up ½ an inch in isolated spots in the center of circulation. Now, I want to show you the difference. We've shown this a lot. This is actually satellite, our tropical satellite, and it looks quite busier than what is actually showing on radar. So the difference of this tropical satellite, it's showing the cloud tops. The darker red shaded colors, those are cloud tops that are much colder. And we look at that because typically we have a lot of thunderstorm activity when we have tall cloud tops. But now I want to compare what we see on a tropical satellite, and then I want to bring in radar. So radar is different. Radar showing what actual rain is falling within these clouds. And notice the rain bands, they don't extend very far. It's really not that impressive. So Hunter, is Hunter's mic open? Because we were actually discussing about this, and it was quite interesting how we were watching this radar. And I want to point out specifically, Hunter, we were mentioning that you look at the center of circulation and you look west, Houston may barely get any rain with this.
That's the thing with this storm, you know, especially on that western side, which is what we consider the drier side of the storm, but there is very little rain there. So, you know, you go a matter of 50, 100 miles outside of the center, and then all of a sudden, yeah, you could still have gusty winds with the pressure gradient, but you're right, Erika, there is not a lot of rain, not too far removed on that western and on that southwestern quadrant of the storm. Now, still there's rain north of there, and that's going to be moving into Louisiana. In fact, we see that taking place now. But as you mentioned, especially closer to Houston, it could, you know, end up that they don't get a ton of rain out of this.
Yeah, so I want to kind of explain why we call it dry side of the storm and the dirtier side of the storm. So what I did, I added winds. These are winds that are circling around this area of low pressure, right? A hurricane is a strong area of low pressure. And the dirtier side of the storm, take a look at where the winds are coming from. It's sucking in all the Gulf moisture, wrapping it around this system, but we still have wraparound winds that are also bringing in drier air, not from the Gulf of Mexico. So that's filtering in that drier air, and that is not allowing any of that moisture on the western side of the storm to really be as active as what we're tracking on the eastern side of the storm. So hopefully that's a good explainer as to why we call the dirty side and also the dry side. Houston's on the dry side, and it's just a very interesting picture here on radar. A lot of folks that are already feeling some tropical storm force winds, they're barely starting to see any of the rain on radar that we're tracking at the moment. As far as what we can expect for areas, I don't see any active tornado warnings at this moment. We do have a tornado threat associated with this system with a tornado watch that's in effect, but no active warnings right now. Hey, Austin, we're on the dry side too. We're on the west side of this system. Notice a few of the outer rain bands trying to make their way through, but then dissipating because of that drier air. If you are on the eastern side of Austin, on our eastern counties, this morning you probably picked up some rain. Believe it or not, that was remnants of what was Marco. So the rain we saw this morning was nothing to do with Marco. Laura was still in the middle portions of the Gulf of Mexico moving northward. But again, we're not going to get much rain at all, except for possibly a couple of the outer bands with Laura. Here's a look at our current winds that are picking up as this Category 4 hurricane continues to approach the upper Texas coast or possibly a Louisiana coast, making landfall around midnight tonight. We'll be on top of it as it moves inland. It's about 60 miles away from landfall, and right now we see the sustained winds that are beginning to pick up. Now, as far as what we can expect rainfall-wise, this is why it's not a huge rain event, not only because of the lack of activity we're seeing on radar right now, but because of how fast this storm is moving. We've talked about the difference of Harvey and also Laura. Harvey sat on top of an area. That's why we saw computer models that easily picked up several feet of rain, which was just mind-boggling as meteorologists to read that, but that was a huge indication that that storm was going to stall out. These numbers, not impressive, which is a good indication that this storm is going to quickly ride up along the state line overnight tonight into tomorrow. So that's why rainfall accumulation is the greatest in areas such as Lake Charles. We have the majority of the moisture to work with once it makes the landfall, but still, even then, those numbers aren't that impressive. So yes, we're going to see flash flooding. Yes, we're going to see rivers and bayous, and also with the storm surge, a lot of those rivers and bayous are going to stall out, and just we're going to have overrunning within those rivers and bayous. But overall, the flood threat could be a lot greater. So here's a look at the latest landfall overnight tonight. Major hurricane. It is still a Cat 4 hurricane as of the latest advisory coming out at 9 p.m. from the National Hurricane Center. They have advisories every single hour now as the system approaches landfall. The biggest threat we're tracking: storm surge and winds. Power outages. A lot of us are going to wake up to power outages, possibly several days, if not a few weeks, with wind speeds that are this strong. When we're talking about Category 4 wind speeds, I just want to kind of point out, if you can read what's on this graphic here, we're talking significant damage to not only your homes, but also trees. Power outages are huge when we have a lot of trees that fall down with the strong winds. Also, the potential for loss of power for several weeks, it's out there. So we know we're going to have a lot of crews working tomorrow once the storm passes through for the next several weeks to try to restore power in your area. This is why we stress hurricane kits are very, very important to have prepared ahead of the storm. You don't know what type of scenario we're going to run into. For us in Austin, what we do know is that we're on the drier side of the storm. Do not expect much in the form of rain with it. As a matter of fact, we're going to get a hotter, drier north wind that will be in place. Temperatures for us locally near 100 degrees. I'm going to toss things over to Quita with the latest.
We're going to take another live look outside right now. This is Galveston Island. Looking pretty deserted and bare out there after a mandatory evacuation was put in place yesterday. And you know, Texas has actually deployed 400 buses, 38 aircraft, 82 boats, 202 high-profile vehicles, and 60 ambulances down to southeast Texas, down to the coast, just to make sure that they will have enough people there to contribute to any rescues or any kind of trouble that they need to take care of. And also something to add, 6 AFD members, at the request of Texas A&M Forest Service's Texas Interstate Fire Mutual Aid System, they are heading to Houston right now. They are going to be there staging to assist with whatever people will need after Hurricane Laura leaves the Gulf Coast. And hundreds of volunteers are on the ground along the Gulf Coast right now to help people evacuate or with whatever they need if they don't decide to leave their home. And one group of volunteers is called the Cajun Navy. The founder explained to us how this operation works and why it's so necessary in times like these.
We have 800 volunteers, so it's a pretty massive force of citizens that are just enabled by technology to communicate. And the reason we're doing this is so we can be a safety net for citizens who either stayed behind or find themselves in danger, or do things like rescue pets, deliver food, water, move people around. We a lot of times end up doing overflow for the first responders. I call us the second responders. We'll fill in the gaps where they may not, their time may be better spent doing other things. We actually have our own software we came up with. It's called Crowd Relief. We use Facebook. And the reason we use Facebook, and I describe it this way, people that are stranded call 911. That's the first thing you think. But 911 is going to be overwhelmed. The authorities just aren't big enough to respond to this type of disaster through those channels. When they get no response from the first responders, they go to Facebook and they ask for help. And now they know about us. They actually come to us directly and ask for help. But we use Facebook for finding people who need help, or they find us through Facebook is a big part of what we do. We also use a walkie-talkie app called Zello. That is instant communications in the same way police dispatchers and fire dispatchers use a walkie-talkie app to communicate with their boots on the ground. We do the same thing. We communicate with individuals who are moving out and about in the community and give them orders to go do things. And then we use a GPS app to know where they are and find the nearest individual to go help.
The stories, the bravery those people show every time there's a storm like this, truly amazing. As we take another live look outside, keeping a close eye on the storm, I do want to mention a programming note. The Republican National Convention is going on currently. We're monitoring that, and we'll have Vice President Mike Pence's speech from tonight for you live. We're going to break out of our coverage here and take that for you live coming up in just a bit. But we are keeping a close eye on this storm, and will throughout the night here as we were taking another live look at Galveston there. That's a part of the state not really worried too much right now, as the storm is going to be pretty far to the east there. Brad Stryker had a chance to talk with a retired Lieutenant General Russell Honore. He's an expert in federal disaster response, leading relief efforts following many hurricanes like Hurricane Katrina.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Lieutenant General Russell Honore. We appreciate you taking a few minutes to talk with us. Tell me very quickly, we have a hurricane that is just barreling toward the Texas coast right now. Tell me a little bit of what your experience is, for those who are not aware, involved with hurricane cleanup and relief afterward.
Yeah, well, in 2005, I was the senior military officer responded to Hurricane Katrina and Rita, representing the Department of Defense and Northern Command. And we worked the recovery and search and rescue after Katrina. And then lo and behold, a few days after Katrina had subsided, here come Rita. And we maneuvered on Rita.
Tell me what you are looking at and what you are anticipating as we see this Category 4 now hurricane coming toward our coastline.
Well, I saw what I needed to see yesterday, which both governors are talking to the people and telling those that really need to evacuate, the mandatory evacuation.
Tell me why it is important for the people in the areas that are in that path of trajectory. Why is it important for them to evacuate and take precautions?
And most of Galveston will be underwater, literally underwater. So we're talking about non-survivable tidal surge. There's no way to survive it if you're on the ground.
We are now just hours away from when we are predicting this hurricane will make landfall on the Texas coast. What are last-minute things for people to do to prepare for this?
Listen to your local radio stations and stay in contact with your local government. And again, let them know where you are, because you may be able to survive, but people ought to know where to come look for you. And good luck and Godspeed.
Lieutenant General Honore, thank you so much for joining us for a few minutes and talking with us about this. Definitely hoping that everybody stays safe.
All right, Brad Stryker's conversation with Lieutenant General Honore. Of course, that was taking place earlier this afternoon. The shift of that storm is now more toward the Louisiana side, as far as we're talking about landfall for the storm. But still, some very good advice, Quita, as people along that part of southeast Texas, very far southeast Texas, and the western part of that Louisiana side are dealing with this storm. Really will be dealing with it for the next several hours.
That's right. One official down there, after he told people that they definitely needed to evacuate, he said, hey, if you choose to stay here, it is you and your God. No, he didn't believe anyone would be able to survive the storm surge and the high winds. And a lot of people think it's the high winds that actually cause deaths. It's not. It's the storm surge. It's all of that water moving inland, coming in so quick, so fast, and just pretty much taking everything and burying everything in its path.
Yeah, this is again a live look at Galveston. Really seems to be spared in this storm as far as the severe storm surge and high winds on the west side of Hurricane Laura. And again, we're going to remind you, if you'd like to watch the Republican National Convention, it is on now. We're airing that on our digital channel 24.2 right now. As soon as Vice President Mike Pence takes the stage to speak tonight, we'll have that live for you right here on KVUE. We are going to take a quick time out now. We'll have more updates leading up to that speech coming up in just a few minutes. Stay where you are.
case by case, year by year, breaking records for our clients. Thomas J. Henry, available 24/7, nights and weekends.
As Hurricane Laura surges,
unsurvivable storm surge.
KVUE's team of meteorologists is keeping your family safe and informed. Your severe weather headquarters on air, online, and on the KVUE app.
Bill Dickerson here with Southwest Kia, and when we're shopping, aren't we all looking for the best value? At Southwest Kia, that's exactly what you're going to receive. All of our salespeople are non-commissioned. The price you see online is the price you pay. An all-new car Kias come with a 10-year, 100,000-mile warranty. Shop southwestkia.com.
After saving up to $1,000 at Haverty's, you won't be thinking about your sofa's hand-placed, pocketed springs, or basking in your new table's solid ambrosia maple. And you won't ponder how your desk will maintain its boss lady presence for decades. Nope. You'll think about what to do with all that money you saved. Get up to $1,000 off and 0% interest on furniture built right, so you can focus on what's really important right now at Haverty's.
Why aren't you cooling?
Is it hot enough in there for you?
Thank God. I think there's something really wrong with my AC.
Go ahead and try to fix me. I'll just break again. I've been driving up your electric bill for years.
I think I may need a new one.
Hey, watch it.
Stop putting up with your annoying AC
and start enjoying your AC.
Just call Radiant.
I can't wait to
As a matter of fact, why don't we try to mic up Hunter? Hunter, do you have some of those updates right now? We're going to get to him in just one sec for those latest updates, actually. But they're continuously doing this job until this storm continues to make landfall. And they've been doing a great job of giving us those updates. So the hurricane hunters, they're the ones who physically fly into these hurricanes. They give us the pressure, if the pressure is dropping. Also, the sustained wind speeds, the strongest wind speeds that we have close to the eye of the hurricane. So whenever we talk about wind speeds, right now it's sustained at about 150 miles an hour. It's not the entire storm that has that strong of a wind speed. It's close to the eye wall, and that's why the eye wall is so dangerous. But yeah, they're the ones that are giving us that data. Hunter is going to chat about the latest info coming out from there. But we did just have one of the most recent advisories where the pressure has dropped. That's the latest information from the hurricane hunters, but the wind speeds not necessarily have increase with this. So whenever we have a drop in pressure, winds increase because the drop in pressure means the system is just strengthening. But we're closing in. It's about to make landfall as a Category 4 hurricane, but very close to a Category 3 hurricane. Category 3 hurricanes are wind speed sustained at 157 miles an hour. But at this time, it does not matter anymore if we're talking about a Cat 4 or a Cat 3, because this is going to bring widespread power outages for anyone who's in the path of this storm. Now, I can say that a lot of folks or very populated areas have actually been able to miss the exact landfall of this storm, but we're still going to see hundreds of thousands of power outages as hurricane force winds as strong as a Category 4 hurricane could possibly move as far inland to Louisiana. So, I wasn't sure if we were going to take my graphics full, or was that answer for just one question, Brian?
That was a great,
that was a good answer.
That was a great answer. You guys are fantastic. I tell you, it's great to have two experts, not just one, but two experts here tonight.
Oh, but I do have a question for you, Erika. I know you talked about it a little bit earlier tonight, but it is a Category 4. It's going to come in strong, come in hard. but it's not hopefully going to just sit there over the Texas coast and over Louisiana. Is that right?
Yes, so that makes a huge difference. So I don't want to compare storms, but the difference of a storm moving slower or the difference of a storm stalling out in somewhere is a huge factor for the flooding threat. So that's why, since this storm is going to push further north much quicker, we're going to miss a major flooding issue. It's moving to the northwest right now at about 15 miles an hour, but I do want to point out that the wind field right now, the wind field is very compact. So this is something so interesting that me and Hunter have been just mesmerized watching this system, because even though it is a Category 4, the wind field and how tight this storm is, it's going to eliminate a lot of folks feeling hurricane force winds extending further out. So right now we have hurricane force winds just about 60 miles from the eye wall, and then tropical storm force winds extending out a little bit further. So even though this system is so close to making landfall, a lot of folks are going to be spared from hurricane force winds, tropical storm force winds, and one of those areas that we were very concerned for was Galveston and the Houston area and very populated regions around southeast Texas. They're so close to an almost Cat 5 hurricane, yet they're probably going to have hardly any impacts. Pretty astonishing as a meteorologist just watching this system. I can't imagine what it feels like. It's been nerve-wracking forecasting this with how close computer models were taking it to the Houston region, and they're going to miss the majority of the action. As a matter of fact, they'll probably not even experience anything stronger than a weak tropical storm force wind, and likely not going to see much rain at all. So very interesting. It all depends what side of the storm you're located in. That's right now in the path of the center of circulation, also east of the center of circulation, that's where we have the greater wind speeds. I see Lake Charles starting to pick up some stronger wind speeds officially at tropical storm force winds. But again, it's only 60 miles from landfall, and it's still not feeling those hurricane force winds. That wind field is very compact around that eye wall. So let's track the winds, because I do think the winds and storm surge will be the biggest threat with this system. And the lack of rain, of the rain threat, will be because of how fast it's going to continue to move northward. So here we are making landfall around midnight. Notice Lake Charles still several miles possibly from the eye of the hurricane, but they may only be feeling tropical storm force winds. It all depends who's in the exact path of this storm, but we're still expecting the possibility of widespread power outages. But notice, if you look west of this system, sustained winds less than 10 miles an hour. The east side of the storm is the stormier, dangerous, busy side of the storm. That's where we have those greater wind speeds, with areas such as even as far out as Monroe with tropical storm force winds. So flooding threat, again, it is minimal, but I do still expect localized flooding possible. Isolated areas do have the possibility of picking up to a foot of rain. I think widespread, closer to the center of circulation and along the state line of Texas, Louisiana, will possibly have up to half a foot for many areas, but that's going to continue to ride northward, and we still could have a little bit of a flash flooding issue by tomorrow evening for areas such as Arkansas as that system continues to move northward. And notice it's still holding on to tropical storm force winds late tomorrow night for the state of Arkansas. We currently have hurricane warnings, tropical storm warnings, and flash flood concerns that are in effect at this time. But storm surge is going to be our secondary main issue because of how far inland we're expecting storm surge to become, and the possibility of storm surge of up to 20 feet. So Quita mentioned before that a lot of folks, get confused of what is the most deadly part of a hurricane and why it's so dangerous, and storm surge is one of those main concerns because especially when it happens at night. This is an overnight storm for folks that did not heed the warnings. Folks did not evacuate that were located in these areas. They're going to be in for almost a deadly situation, possibly deadly for some areas the closer you are to the coast, for the possibility of storm surge of up to 20 feet. So we have a very strong Cat 4 hurricane, but it's interesting because it's very compact. Notice cloud coverage, satellite imagery when the sun starts to go down, the lack of clouds is on this imagery, but the rain around this system, not very wide. The wind field is very compact as well. We have drier air filtering in on the western side of the storm. No active warnings as we speak. And as far as what we see for central Texas, we likely will not get any rain for this area. Okay, so I want to check in with Hunter. I did promise that Hunter had the update from the hurricane hunters.
Yeah, so as we were talking about them a few minutes ago, they were actually right at that time flying directly through the eye wall in the center of Laura. And they found that it has at least maintained its intensity. So pressure may be down slightly to about 935, 934. And again, if this remains to strengthen by a couple miles per hour or so, remains to be seen by landfall. Want to show you this, though. As Erika was talking about, it's kind of remarkable on especially that western side. You don't see a ton of rain. So I have the radar on here. Here, we'll go. Here's just the radar. That's what it looks like. Then when you throw on the satellite, you can see the cloud cover on the satellite picture looks a little bit meaner. That goes all the way over towards Galveston, but that's cloud cover. You know, we don't have rain that's making it that far west as on the western side of the storm. That's what we call the dry side of the storm, where you get that wraparound drier air typically from the north, and that tends to be a lot drier. You can see that on our water vapor imagery. That's where the oranges and those rust colors are. That includes us here in central Texas with the drier air on the left-hand side of the system. Meanwhile, you see the extremely moist air, the tropical moisture, right where the center of the system is, and then that continues for hundreds of miles across the rest of the Gulf of Mexico all the way over to the Florida Peninsula, where they have that moisture-rich southerly flow on the east side of the storm. So while rain and moisture-rich air may only go, 50, 100 miles, if that, on the west side of the storm, you have that for hundreds of miles potentially on the east side of the storm. Not to say that there's rain for hundreds of miles, but that's where you certainly feel that tropical humidity from the northern Gulf, and that will spread up into the southeastern United States, into Mississippi, even the Florida Panhandle in Georgia on the moisture-rich side of that storm. So, Erika, as you were saying, we didn't really go into this thinking that rain was going to be the main concern, but kind of as advertised, especially on the left-hand side of the dry side of that storm, not at this point tracking a ton of rain.
Yeah, so we'll be mainly focusing in on waking up to the possibility of widespread power outages, again, for whoever is in the path of this storm, because of how tight the wind field is around that center of circulation. So it's sparing a lot of extremely populated areas. As of right now, we're closing in on about 60 miles to landfall, so expecting it still to make landfall around midnight tonight. But we're going to have a big update from the National Hurricane Center at 10 p.m. So we're about 30 minutes away from that, but for now, we're going to send you to break.
Actually, we've got a quick, just a few minutes from now, we're going to join ABC's national coverage of the Republican National Convention. In fact, let's go there right now. We'll be back with more news at 10. We'll see you then.
Good evening, America. It's an honor to speak to you tonight from the hallowed grounds of Fort McHenry, the site of the very battle that inspired the words of our national anthem. Those words have inspired this land of heroes in every generation since. It was on this site 206 years ago when our young republic heroically withstood a ferocious naval bombardment from the most powerful empire on earth. They came to crush our revolution, to divide our nation, and to end the American experiment. The heroes who held this fort took their stand for life, liberty, freedom, and the American flag. And those ideals have defined our nation. but they were hardly ever mentioned at last week's Democratic National Convention. Instead, Democrats spent 4 days attacking America. Joe Biden said that we were living through a season of darkness. But as President Trump said, where Joe Biden sees American darkness, we see American greatness. In these challenging times, our country needs a president who believes in America, who believes in the boundless capacity of the American people to meet any challenge, defeat any foe, and defend the freedoms we hold dear. America needs 4 more years of President Donald Trump in the White House. Before I go further, allow me to